Hi, everybody. This is Michelle Ferris, and this is Sharon
Sharon
Martin.
Martin.
We decided we wanted to do something together called Codependency in Coffee. Show them your mug. There you go. And what we decided to do was there was a lot of common questions we get on codependency. So we decided to do a few for you. And I hope you like it. Sharon, what's your website before we get started? So people know?
Yeah, so you can find me at livewellwithsharonmartin.com.
Great. And you're a licensed social worker?
Yep, licensed clinical social worker. And both of us are in San Jose, California.
Yeah. And you've written a lot of really, really powerful books too. So you're a very well-known author. Yes.
All right. And how about you? Where's your website, Michelle?
So I'm at counselingrecovery.com, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and an anger management specialist. So those are the two areas that I cover.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're going to start with what is codependency, since I think there's a lot of confusion around that.
Yeah, we'll just talk a little bit about that before we really get into the meat of the other questions that we've gotten. So you can feel free to jump in here, Michelle, with whatever you want to add as well. I always end up feeling like codependency is much more complicated than it seems on the surface. I think most people think about codependency primarily in terms of somebody having a relationship with somebody who's an alcoholic or an addict, or somebody who's having some other kind of mental health or obvious kind of struggle. And certainly that is often the case, but it's not always the case. And I think sometimes that throws people off because they think, oh, well, I can't possibly be codependent because that's not an issue that I have in particular. Right. But, those codependent traits end up showing up in a lot of different ways. And so one piece of it is this sort of overly focused attention on somebody else and their problems. And so for those of us who struggle with codependency, we kind of get wrapped up in what other people are doing and wanting to make sure that they're, doing what we think are the right things. And so we fall into that kind of fixing, rescuing, over helping way of being. That, like I said, it sort of takes over things for us, both in terms of, I think, often anxiety and just kind of ruminating and overthinking about things, but also it just takes up a lot of our time and energy, and that will sort of pull us away from being able to focus on our own needs or even just understanding who we are as people. And so there's often this sort of sense that we've sort of lost who we are because we're so focused on other people. And so often like self-care doesn't happen because we're so busy thinking about what does everybody else need that we don't pay attention, and we really don't feel like our needs matter, or that it's, we're almost sort of like we're worth, putting the time and energy, your money into doing things for ourselves. So that's one big piece of it. I don't know if anything, that kind of
that was great. Yeah. I think what I would add to that, I totally agree that when we're codependent, we tend to lose ourselves, and we get so focused on how other people see us that we actually forget to care about how we see ourselves. And that people-pleasing aspect of, am I okay for you, versus really understanding what we like and who we are as people, we just totally lose that. And I think one of the things that struck me when you were talking is sometimes people think just if they have relationship problems, they're codependent, and that's not true. It's really about losing yourself and not being able to focus on taking care of yourself in relationships. So I think you had a great explanation there. I think that was really good.
Yeah. I think at the root of it, it really does end up being a difficulty in valuing ourselves, knowing ourselves, loving ourselves. And that, of course, just informs the way we are in the world in every single relationship that we have. And that's, sort of the other piece is sometimes people think, codependency only happens between romantic partners or in marriages, right? But it can happen if you're a codependent person. It tends to show up in, some form to some extent, in friendships, at work, with your boss, your coworkers. It just sort of permeates, everything that you do. It's, really is a mindset.
That's true.
So anyway, I mean, that's at least a beginning understanding of it. There's more.
Hopefully people will really appreciate that, because I do think there's a lot of confusion around that. Okay, so let's get started with the first question. Okay, so, and this, again, we got this directly from our Facebook pages. So hopefully some of you are going to be able to hear your question. So, okay, the first one is, and this is for you: I'm caring for people all day long, my aging parents, my children, my students. How do I cope with the guilt of not being able to adequately take care of everyone?
It's hard. I mean, because you can definitely see that element of that really big heart and just wanting to take care of everybody.
Right.
You know, and I always come back to just trying to remember that we all have limits. Like whether that's, your time, your energy, your money, so forth. There's only so much that any of us can do in any, given day or week. And I think most of us feel like there is more to do than we could possibly have that time or energy or money to do. And so that ends up feeling like we're falling short. And that's where the guilt comes in. Guilt is really a feeling like you're doing something wrong. And I think in this situation, it's like you've kind of have this really impossibly high standard that I'm going to be able to meet everybody else's needs and take care of what everybody else needs all of the time. And then when I can't do it, it feels like I'm failing at this job, right? I think the person who wrote this particular question sounds like they're a teacher, but I encounter this with people in various other helping professions, lots of nurses and therapists and doctors who are, not, just taking care of people all day at work. And then, of course, if you have children or you've got a disabled family member or an elderly parent, I mean, it is a ton of work. And so, I mean, I think the other thing is, to remember that asking for help is a good thing. I mean, it's not a failing if you can't do it all of the time. It really may be, impossible to do that. And the other thing, like we already started to mention this self-care piece, and we'll probably keep coming back to it repeatedly throughout this video, is that if you are asking a lot of yourself, you're giving a lot, you have to also give a lot back to yourself, right? It's sort of like a bank account, right? You have to keep, putting money back in if you're going to keep making withdrawals. And I think that's what ends up happening is like we're giving, but we're not putting anything back in. And then we're depleted, right? We're overtired, we're cranky, we feel guilty. And that doesn't end up, serving anybody. That doesn't make us the best caretakers or teachers or therapists, right? So also, we want to remember that, doing things for ourselves allows us to take care of other people. We can't just neglect that piece and do the giving and the caretaking for others.
Absolutely. And I think when people really care about us, they want us to take care of ourselves. They don't really want us to burn out.
Right, because how does that help anybody?
Yeah,
right? I mean, we're not, like I said, we're not at our best when we're depleted. So that's a really good point. I think to try to remember that, even if other people aren't verbalizing it, but if these are mutual relationships, that certainly we deserve to be taken care of just as much as anybody else.
That's right.
Yeah, I think oftentimes people, sort of go to the other extreme and think, oh, if I start doing things for myself or prioritizing my needs, it means that I think I'm more important than everybody else.
Selfish.
Right, I'm selfish. But what we're really talking about is just trying to feel like you matter as much as anybody else.
Right. And yet
it's not more. It's at least the same.
Yeah. And I think in the beginning, because codependent don't take care of themselves, even starting to may feel selfish. And I guess I want to normalize that, because it is hard to start to put your needs out there. And I like your mug. That's cute. I'm a Starbucks gal. So I think that's really important to be able to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question. So this one's for you. This person has asked, how do I accept my emotions and express them in a healthy way? How can I learn to sit with the negative emotions? Well, that's a big question.
I know. I really like this one, because I think, as I know for me, when I've I have codependency in my past too, and I'm still recovering. I think the biggest thing is when you're codependent, you don't want to feel those feelings because one, it's super uncomfortable. And two, I think there's a real belief that other people won't want to hear it.
Mm.
And that's really not true. But, it is a risk when we start to express anger, resentment, hurt. And I think because there's such a people pleasing around codependency and the desire to please people and not upset them, that it's just easier to stuff our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there comes a turning point in every codependent's life where they can't do it anymore. And it's just too painful. You're getting sick. It's starting to show up at work. You're yelling at your kids. You just can't contain it anymore. And to me, that's actually a positive thing because that's where you're in that sick and tired of being sick and tired mentality. And you're willing to finally say, you know what, I need to do something different.
Yeah. I mean, I always, try to talk to my clients about the fact that, like feelings serve a purpose. They are there for a reason, right? It's sort of like it's like a messenger trying to let you know that something is going on that you need to pay attention to. Yeah. And they're gonna just keep coming until you listen.
Yeah.
Right? As much as we try to push it away, they are gonna come. No matter what, there's right. Like you said, I mean, there's really sort of no avoiding, the feelings. You can right. only, push them down or nub them out for so long.
Right.
And then of course, sometimes when we do that, we just end up creating more problems.
Yeah. And I think pain is a great motivator because that is what makes us change. We don't change mm-hmm. because we should. We change because we're hurting and we really want something different.
Yeah.
I do want to speak to how to do that though, because I think that there is such fear around it. So, I know people hear about I statements all the time. You and I talk about that a lot in our blog, but it really is powerful to say, I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling upset. But I know sometimes I'll say that to my clients and they'll look at me like, uh-oh, what are you talking about? That's too big of a step. So what I tell them is start by saying you're uncomfortable because that's mm-hmm. a little more neutral and you can mm-hmm. say, that just doesn't feel right or that feels uncomfortable because most people aren't going to react to that. Because part of what makes codependent people not want to speak up is the fear of the reaction they're going to get, right? They think, oh, somebody's going to get upset. Well, if you make it about you and say, you know what, this is just how I'm feeling, this is how I'm seeing the situation, then it becomes more subjective versus you're making me feel this way and making it more about the other person and blaming. So I think sharing it as an opinion and hey, this is just my point of view. This is just how I see it. Can come across in a softer way. The other thing is always name the behavior you're upset about. So if somebody said something that hurt my feelings, I will say, when you said this, I felt hurt. Because if I make a general statement, I'm going to probably put my foot in it and it's not going to go well. Mm-hmm. The other thing I like to do is kind of give them the assumption that assume the other person's good intentions. Mm. So I might say, I know you had no intention of hurting my feelings, and this is how I took what you said. Mm-hmm. So it kind of softens the other person to realize, oh, she knows that I didn't mean anything by it, and most likely they don't, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, that can be a soft way to start putting your foot out there because if you can't have your feelings in relationships, you're going to feel really frustrated and you're not going to be very genuine. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to feel known. I mean, I think to me, the test of a good relationship is, can they hear your feelings? I think that's so key. And yet sometimes the starting point is acknowledging them yourself. So even if you're not ready to say something to someone else, maybe you do some journal writing and admit that, wow, you know what? I'm really mad right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's your starting point, is to just acknowledge for yourself how you feel.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I just want to sort of maybe tag on one little piece to that, because I think You're right. I mean, you're starting to get into this aspect of it where sometimes it's not so much about needing to express the feeling to somebody else. Either it's not a relationship, where that's possible, or, I'm sort of
Good
just
point.
trying to think of an example. Like maybe it's just an acquaintance at work or something who, did something that annoyed you, but it doesn't, in that situation feel like that's sort of the remedy of dealing with your feelings, but we still have the feelings. And you were starting to say, like, maybe one of the things we could do is do some journaling. Because I think this is the other, piece that people get kind of stuck on is like, they're like, oh, I got all, now I start realizing I have all these feelings, but I don't know how to tolerate them, essentially, right? That's that piece about sort of just sort of sitting with it. And I think part of it is also just being super realistic about it, which is that it is painful. It is going to hurt for a while. But realizing also that feelings are going to come and go, that they do not last forever, even though sometimes when you're in it, it really feels like it. We can assure you that it will not last forever. And there is almost this sort of building up some tolerance for it that I think can be helpful, where, it literally is like, okay, let me try to just let this be for 5 minutes before I, go and smoke that cigarette or whatever I would normally do immediately to try to relieve some of that discomfort. Just kind of try to get yourself to, incrementally at least kind of tolerate it. Because when you do that, then you realize that you can.
And I think a great way to start is, even if you're walking around your house and you're feeling off for some reason, literally just sit down and breathe for a minute and go, okay, what's going on for me? Because I guarantee if you do that, something's going to come up. Something someone said, maybe you just had a negative thought, maybe you're worrying about something, but your body will hold that feeling until it gets expressed. So in some ways, it's very simple to have to feel your feelings, to actually do it, but it's not easy because, like you said, it can be painful. So
and then like this is how I end up, I'm thinking about self-care often, is exactly like what you were saying, is like, if you notice the feeling, then you can ask yourself, what do I need? Right? If I say I feel angry about what happened at work today, what is it that I need, right? And then I can give that to myself as a way of taking care of myself, and hopefully sort of processing and working through some of those feelings as well, rather than just like, oh, I don't need anything. Like it's not bothering me.
That's codependency in times 10. I don't need anything.
Oh, it's fine. And then it's not fine, and it'll eventually become known that it's not fine, and then
it'll blow up
10 times worse. Exactly.
All right.
Why don't we move on?
Okay. So next question for you is, my parents are very intrusive and critical. How can I set boundaries with them? Oh, that's a big question too.
It is, but it actually, I think, tags on really nicely to what you were already saying, because you were giving a great example of how to use those I statements, which I think are a really great way to start with boundaries. So basically, I mean, the first thing about boundaries is to try to identify what it is that you need. And then you can try to express that to somebody as a request. But I think the really important piece about boundaries is for folks to remember that boundaries are not about trying to get other people to do what you want. Because that's never going to work, right? Because we don't have control over other people, and we have also just sort of minimal influence even over people. So what we need to do is focus on what we can do, right? So boundaries are really about, what do you need in order to feel emotionally safe or physically safe, for you to feel okay in this situation. What are the choices that you have? So going back to where we were. So one way of doing this is to use those I statements and to say that, I feel, hurt and misunderstood, when you criticize me about what I'm eating or about my weight. And then the second part is the request. And I would like you to blank, to please refrain from saying those kinds of comments to me. So that's just a request that you can make, and that's an example of a simple boundary. And I will say, oftentimes we need to repeat the same boundary over and over and over again, because, you know, especially in situations with our parents, you know, these, you know, right, these kinds of criticisms and intrusive remarks tend to be things that have developed over many years, and they're well entrenched, and you're not going to say it once and expect that they're going to be like, oh, light bulb moment, that's hurtful, I'm not going to do it anymore. Even if they really don't want to be hurtful and they really weren't aware of their behavior, you know, when you've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years, it's not like you're going to just flip the switch, even if you want to. So we also have to think about, well, what am I going to do if somebody does not follow the boundary, if they can't meet that request that I am making, right? And there's all kinds of reasons why people can't or won't. And then that again, it sort of brings us back to, you know, to ourselves to say, okay, what are the choices that I have? And I think this is where people often get stuck, because they don't like the choices that they have.
Well,
I'm like, it gets hard. I'd rather be able to force you to do what I want rather than say, oh, well, you're not going to do what I want. So what is it that I'm left with?
I always like having people do a plan B. Like, you can have your boundary, but if they don't respect it, what are you going to do to take care of yourself? Because we can't guarantee the response we get.
Exactly. So, you know, in this situation, if you're, you know, going to holiday parties with your parents who are criticizing you, and you have, you know, stated your boundary and maybe stated it a few times, and they're continuing to say things that are hurtful to you, you think about, okay, well, what is it that I can do? You know, maybe I, you know, make sure I don't sit next to them at the dinner table, or maybe it's I excuse myself to take a walk around the block so I can, you know, clear my head. Maybe I talk to somebody supportive, a family member, or, you know, even somebody on the phone, to try to just get some support through that situation. You know, or maybe it's so bad that I just choose to go home early, or I don't go to certain family functions. Those are all options, and there are probably a whole bunch more as well.
Oh, but those are great. Those are great.
But like I said, I mean, you know, you have to understand what it is that you can do to try to deal with that situation, even though it may feel like, well, hey, this isn't what I really want. This isn't the ideal. But like you said, I mean, it's the plan B. It's the, okay, here's what I can do to look out for myself. And that really is what boundaries are about at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, and then you feel like you're going to be okay no matter what happens, versus I'm only going to be okay if they follow my boundary, or if they do what I ask them to do. Because then we're in that powerless state of, you know, now my serenity has gone out the window because they won't do what I want them to do, which is never ideal.
Right.
More crazy making.
Yeah, and I think if you use the I statement to make the request, I mean, you're already like way ahead of where most people are, because that's a very, you know, non-confrontational way of doing it. It's not an accusation or a demand, but there's still no guarantee that it's going to be well received. And, you know, and that is a risk that we take when we set a boundary. I
love hearing you talk about boundaries. I have to say, you have so much great content with boundaries. I love it.
But anyway, so, so there's no guarantee that that it's going to be well received. But I think, as we've been saying, I mean, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it.
That's right.
You know, we are kind of stirring things up a little bit when we set boundaries, but it's an essential thing to do. Otherwise, what's your alternative is to just sit there and let people criticize you and for you to feel awful, right? I mean, and that's not fair to yourself.
No. I think that's where the pain will help, though, because usually the pain is going to get us to the point where we have to do something different.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we do question number 4 here, which is, how do I trust my intuition in relationships? Okay, what have you got for us?
All right, I like this question. And I actually have heard it several times, so I think this is an important one to address. So the first is, can you recognize what your intuition looks like? Because some people think, like for me, I get a feeling in my stomach, But I also sometimes hear a voice like, that's not a good idea. I would be cautious right now. So be open to how you receive that information, because some people get it through feeling. Some people literally might hear something, that inner voice. Some people might see a picture. Some people might even get a stomach ache.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, being able to trust that. And what I usually say when people have trouble with this is go back to a situation where you had a bad feeling and you ignored it. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you can look back and go, oh, I was right, that's your intuition. And I don't say that to make you feel bad. It's really, that's how we learn, is to go back and go, wow, you know what? That is a time where I could have trusted myself because I ended up being completely right.
I find that very, very helpful when you said that, because people often feel like they've lost their intuition along the way, that they haven't trusted their instincts, and now they're not sure. They don't hear them, they don't feel them, or they just question them so much. So that's really helpful, I think, to think back and find that nugget there of, the intuition has been there. We just need to listen.
Right, and start paying attention, because if you can start to trust yourself and how you feel about certain things, then you're going to be able to practice that in relationship. Because the other thing is, we all have red flags in relationships that show up, but we may not, especially for codependent, we may not want to listen to it because we don't want to be alone, or we think, oh, this is going to get better. The person isn't really mean what he's saying or she's saying. But really, those warning signs, now I'm not saying the first time something happens, you chuck somebody, but if something happens 2 or 3 times, that gets my attention, where I start to say, wait a minute, now I'm realizing this is how this person is. This is not what I'm going to be able to change. This is not going to blow over in time. This is how the person is showing up. So at that point, I get to choose whether or not I want to participate in it, or how close I want to be to that person. Like, for instance, if somebody isn't very reliable or compassionate, they're probably not going to be in my inner circle, because that, I really value that. So I may still be able to connect and be friends, but I'm not necessarily going to trust them to show up or to be compassionate when I need that, because they've already shown that they're not capable of doing that. So for me, that intuition kind of can bleed into our relationships to start to make us feel like, I can now trust who I'm picking. Now, the other part of that is looking at the patterns of who we attract, because we all have patterns of who we attract as mates, as friends, as sometimes even as clients. But what do we attract in our life? Do we tend to attract people that take? Do we tend to attract people with lots of problems? Do we tend to attract people who tend to be more self-centered? All of those are within the realm of codependency. So I think it really helps us to identify those patterns, because that too can help us trust our intuition of, this might not be a healthy relationship for me. Maybe I need to do more work on self-care, or really decide how close I want to be to them.
Yeah, that's great.
So I think I love intuition, though, because now I always know when I don't pay attention to it, it's going to bite me every single time. But I don't let it bite me anymore, because I trust it.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
All right. Let's go to another
next one.
Page 2. All right. Let me just see here. All right. So, I got my pages mixed up. All right. Ooh, this is a good one too. How to stop worrying about what others think, about what others do or don't do. Okay.
So this is a good classic codependent behavior.
Dilemma, right?
Right, is that we get hung up on what other people are doing. Often we have very clear ideas about what we think other people should be doing.
Right.
And it is frustrating to us and worrisome, I should say, and definitely worrisome when we have a loved one who is not doing what we think would be in their own best interest. So I guess the first thing to remember here is that this really can be a very stressful situation to be in. When we're talking about somebody that you're very close to and that you really care about, and you see them making choices that you know, at least from your perspective, you feel like, hey, these are really bad choices. I can see where this is going to end up, and it's not going to be good. And I'm trying, to direct you in a way, but you don't want to hear what I have to say. Or maybe you've even gotten to the point where you've realized, hey, you know what, giving advice and nagging and, being controlling is not helpful here, so I'm going to back off. But you're still stuck with that worry, that just, the anxiety of what's going to happen. I'm concerned about their well-being, and I feel powerless. And I think that's a big part of it, is recognizing that part of what you're feeling is that powerlessness. One piece of this, I think, is recognizing that this is a really tough situation, and be kind to yourself. Don't just beat yourself up because you're worrying, or even if you've fallen into some enabling kinds of behaviors or controlling kinds of behaviors. Be aware, see what's going on, but be kind to yourself through this process. And then just in terms of like more concrete kinds of things, if you are really stuck in this kind of overthinking, this ruminating, worrying kind of situation, what you want to do is find something, probably a variety of different things, to interrupt that cycle. And what that is can be, any number of things, and it might be different things on different days. But I do like to sort of frame it like I just did, in terms of like, what can I do to disrupt this thought pattern that I'm having? Which means I can't just sit here and do nothing about it, because that's not going to change anything, right? So it might be helpful sometimes to get up and get a change of scenery. So, maybe I go into the other room and, do some stretches, or I go out and get some fresh air. Maybe I put on some music to try to, kind of get some different kind of mood, energy going, or maybe it's some journaling, or it could be, talking to a therapist or a supportive friend where I can really process some of those worries. And just, part of it, that what I personally find helpful is the idea, sort of like, let me get it out of my head, like literally into the paper, or out into the open where, other people are hearing it as well. And that way it just doesn't feel like it's so big in my mind. And also that it just sort of has a holding place, that I know, like, I can come back to that. What else? I don't know if anything else comes to mind for you in terms of sort of disrupting that.
When you were talking, it made me think of that saying, that acronym for fear, false evidence appearing real. Because so much of what we worry about doesn't actually happen. It's what we think is going to happen, what we're worrying about, but it really isn't reality. So I love your idea of doing something to stop that thought pattern, and to really give yourself that reality check of, you know what, this probably isn't even happening right now. And I can soothe myself around that.
Yeah, this is, what I call catastrophizing. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, we're just like imagining the worst possible thing that could happen. And it's right. It's usually not the most probable thing that's going to happen. But you know what, and even if it is, sometimes there isn't anything that you can do to prevent it. And so, obviously the worrying is not helpful. So sometimes it's also just, I think, realizing that like I have some energy about this, and it's sort of this nervous, anxious kind of energy, but I could take that energy and direct it towards something that feels like it's more meaningful. Like I'm thinking like let's just say if you did have, an adult child who was struggling with addiction, and you're just, consumed by the worry about what that child is going to do or not do. And if you really realize that there isn't much that you can do, unfortunately, to affect change, with your child at this point, maybe you take some of that energy and you do some volunteer work, Where you can, do something positive with some other people. It's obviously, it's not the same in terms of sort of solving that problem. But like I said, I mean, it is a way of using some of that energy for something that's good.
Because you're redirecting it.
Yeah, exactly. Because we do end up, spending a lot of energy on the worrying.
Yeah.
And it's, and it does, drain us, but there's nothing to show for it at the end.
And I think our brain needs that job. It just needs a different job. And if it has one, I think it does well. But to just stop the behavior is just too difficult for most of us.
Right. Right.
I love your suggestions for that.
Okay. Well, let's move on. We've got one last question for today. So this one's for you, Michelle, and it is, how do I stop being a doormat without hurting someone's feelings? Yes,
this was a really good one too. I think this is the codependent's greatest challenge, is how do you speak up and risk hurting somebody else? Because that false evidence appearing real, I think, is really part of this, is we imagine if we say no, somebody's going to be really upset. But honestly, when I started saying no, years back, people didn't even care. They were like, oh, okay. And I had it dreamed up in my head that it was going to be this big problem, and people were going to be like, why do you think you can say no? That's really selfish, all that stuff. And none of it actually happened. So I think some of the things about being a doormat and people pleaser, because it's kind of the same thing we're talking about, is don't make those negative assumptions that people aren't going to like it, because, people who really love you want you to take care of yourself. And if they don't, then you need to reassess how close you want that person to be to you. Because if they really don't want you to set boundaries for yourself, to me, that's a major red flag.
Yeah. I think, interestingly, sometimes people will respect you more when you start saying no.
I agree. Because we're teaching people how to treat us.
Right. We don't really think about it like that. But often, at least in the long run, people go, yeah, like I think that's great that you set a limit there, or you didn't let somebody, talk to you that way, or, you realize that you don't have time for that. So you decline to do it. Because sometimes I think sometimes when people get angry about it, it's almost because they're jealous, like that they want to say no too.
Oh yeah, I've definitely seen that.
Right, and they kind of feel trapped in whatever the commitment is, and like, oh, you said no, but I don't know.
Right. I wish I could. So some concrete ways to start is, I always suggest with a new behavior to start with the people you feel safest with. Don't start with your family if they're problematic, or the person you're really intimidated with, or the person who rages. Start with the people who are going to probably accept you and love you no matter what you say and do. But speaking up, you can start with something as simple as, if somebody asks you where you want to go to eat, instead of saying, oh, wherever you want, gee, you know what? I'd like Chinese food tonight. And actually say, because or a movie, you can start with really tiny things, because most likely people are not going to get mad when you say what movie you want to see or where you want to go to dinner. But it gives you a chance to practice, I'm going to put my opinion out there and see how it goes. Because the more you do that, the more the codependent is going to build confidence to realize that, hey, you know what? It's actually okay to have a voice, and people want to hear from you. Because I think codependency makes us feel so invisible, because we're so used to not having needs and taking care of other people, that speaking up becomes a major threat. But you can't really have satisfying relationships without that. Let's see. The other thing I was going to say is, there's a lot of kudos in being a people pleaser. And I want to really acknowledge that this is a tough one to give up. To be a yes person, of course I'm always going to be there. Because let's face it, people get promotions because of this. People become the go-to, the hero in their family. So by no means is this an easy thing to do. And this is a process. This is not a one-time thing where, okay, today I'm never going to people please again. can I do less? Can I do a little bit more for me? The other thing I was thinking about with this doormat question is when we're saying yes all the time, our focus is usually on them and how we can take care of them. And if we can turn that around and say, well, what do I need? Maybe I need to get my focus off of other people and back onto myself. That people pleasing is going to get better, because then I'm going to be more concerned about me, which, let's face it, most people are, right? We're more concerned about how we're doing life than other people, but codependents reverse that. So I think the healing starts with us, really doing that redirect in our mind for what do we need versus getting in somebody else's head, because that's always going to make us feel more powerless and more out of control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The one thing that I'll add, as you were talking about this being a process and something that we really need to practice, and I think this is probably true on everything that we've talked about in this video. But one thing I like to remind people of is that, when you have been that yes man for so long and you start to say no or to set some of those boundaries, is that, it's normal that you will get some resistance, at least from some people.
Right.
I mean, I think you're correct that there are definitely situations where people really, we feel like made it out to be a big deal in our head, and nobody really cares if we say no to, right, chairing the bake sale this year. But there are some people who will be taken aback or will have some negative feelings about it. But for some people, we really need to give them time to adjust to the changes that we're making. So I think what happens is we're aware of the intentions that we're setting and why we're making the changes. But if somebody else has experienced us as saying yes, for our entire life, and suddenly we start saying no,
big change.
Yeah, we just need to give, it's not necessarily that they're so upset with us that the relationship can't go on. It's really just that they need to get used to sort of the new,
right.
the new you, the new
right.
me, whatever. And so part of that is that I think it's the practice, not just for us, but also practice so that other people can get used to experiencing us in a new way.
Right. Absolutely. There's a learning curve because we're teaching people how to treat us, and we're the ones changing the rules, so to speak. So we really need to give them some grace around that. Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, this was really fun.
Yes. So that is the end of our questions for today. So I hope that you all enjoyed it. It was great for me. It was a good time.
This was great. And it was great doing something with you, Sharon, because I really
my pleasure. So I hope this is okay with you. I didn't ask you ahead of time, Michelle, but if those of you who are watching have additional questions that you would like for us to address,
I was thinking that.
either in another video or possibly in a blog post or in some other ways, please just reach out to us and let us know what your questions are. You are welcome to send me an email. My email address, sorry, this is a little bit of a mouthful, but it's info@livewellwithsharonmartin.com. Excuse me.
And what's your Facebook page?
It's just Sharon Martin LCSW, I think. Okay. If you search for that, you should find it. I don't know, honestly.
I think you're right.
Yes. So yes, you can send us an email and just put codependency question or viewer question or something like that in the subject line, and then I will probably not respond to you through email, but just know that I'm going to keep all those questions and save them for another thing. And I don't know if Michelle, if there's a good email or contact you if you want to give that as well.
Sure. It's mft@counselingrecovery.com, and my Facebook page is Counseling Recovery. And we both have pretty active pages, and we definitely do lots of posts on boundaries and codependency, so feel free to join us there. What other social media platforms would you like people to know about?
Instagram's good.
Okay.
I try to post a few different things over there on Instagram. And again, I think if you just search for me by my name, Sharon Martin, LCSW, you should find me.
Okay. And Pinterest, you're really big on Pinterest.
Yeah, Pinterest. If people are on Pinterest, I like Pinterest. I can find lots of cool stuff on there.
I know. I like it too. Yeah, I'm on Pinterest and Instagram.
I think you have even nicer pins.
I don't know about that. All right. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.